All right, we're a couple minutes past, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Bojo, Mary Belzuk, Nadej Nakas, Bodawatami, and Dow, Miigwech. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. My name is Mary Belzuk, and I am a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm also the communications manager at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, and we are the official policy and research partner for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. Can we advance to the next slide, please? I just wanted to start off by welcoming everyone to this webinar today. We are so grateful for you guys taking time out of your day to join us for this. And we're just so excited to be able to share with you all Gaining Ground and all of the work that we've put into it. So please advance to the next slide. I just wanted to go over the agenda for the day just to get us started. So we'll do introductions before we get into a little bit of background on what the Native Farm Bill Coalition is and the report. And then at the end, we'll have time for question and answer. So if you're tuning in here on Zoom, you can put in questions throughout the presentation into the chat that we will then bring up at the end. And if you're on any of our social channels that are streaming live at the same time, you can comment and those will come through as well. So that's a couple different ways that you'll be able to put questions in, but we can also open the floor later if you want to ask questions one-on-one. So next slide, please. To kick off introductions, I wanted to first introduce one of our co-authors, Erin Parker. She is the executive director at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. And I just wanted to say thank you, Erin, for joining us today and give you just a little bit of time to introduce yourself and gaining ground in our work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mary Bell. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the launch of Gaining Ground. The Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative team is so proud to be the research partner to the Native Farm Bill Coalition and to be able to join you today and share with you all our Gaining Ground report. This report highlights over 150 different opportunities for positive policy change for Indian country agriculture through the 2023 Farm Bill. And to build this report, our team didn't just look at past farm bills and what happened in 2018's Farm Bill, for example. We also incorporated opportunities that have long been identified for Indian country in agricultural policy from our partner organizations like the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the National Congress of American Indians, and the Intertribal Timber Council, just to name a few folks. We were really supported in this work by the entire Native Farm Bill Coalition team, and we are so grateful to our friends and our colleagues at every single one of those organizations, and for the leadership, of course, of our NFBC co-chairs, Vice Chair Cole Miller of the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, and IEC's Executive Director, Carrie Jo Lawrence. I also have a few additional words of gratitude before I turn over to our next speaker. None of the work that we're going to share with you today would have been possible without the financial support and leadership of the Native American Agriculture Fund, the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, and Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger. Without NAF's commitment to continuing the work that began with Shakopee's strong support back in 2017, and without Mazon's continued stalwart allyship, the opportunities that we've lifted up in this report would not exist. So from everyone at IFAI, thank you so much for trusting us with this work. We are delighted to have you with us here today to talk about positive movement and policy change for Indian Country Agriculture Council. Mary Bell, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Erin. Next slide, please. So I want to introduce our next co-author, which is Carly Griffith Hotvet. She is the Associate Director at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. So I just want to toss it over to Carly for her to have time to give a few remarks.
Odo Mary, Osio Nagata. My name is Carly Hotvet. I am the Associate Director and an attorney here at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. And in addition to all the great funders and support that we've received, I really need to make sure that we give a shout out to our incredible staff at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative who spent so much time and commitment towards getting the content of the Gaining Ground report put together. So in addition to the leadership that we received from Erin and all the communication support that Mary Bell's been able to provide, I also want to recognize our staff, our Director of Policy and Governance, John Van Poel, our staff attorney, Kelly Case, our Tribal Enterprise Specialist, Will Seeley, our Youth Programs Coordinator, Summer Wilkie, our Policy Liaison, Joseph Damaso, and Christiana Kotu, who is our law/grad student who helped us out quite a bit. And I also want to give a shout out to our administrative staff, Nikki, Kelly, and Brenton for their commitment and support to all of us as we were diligently working on getting this report out. We're very proud of the work contained herein. It represents a vast scope of soliciting feedback, drilling down the ask, doing the research, and compiling the policy recommendations that's drawn from those. We really view ourselves as a conduit that our stakeholders and our other partners can leverage in order to really receive the benefits of all the work that we're able to do, but really put them in the driver's seat. So we appreciate being the partner for all of our fantastic stakeholders and orgs. And I need to clarify and give a shout out to Cindy. I misspoke earlier when I was given a shout out for our administrative staff. So Cindy is our executive assistant. She's been fantastic support for us. And so with that, again, I'm so proud to be able to share this report with you all, recognizing all of our great partners and our co-authors and everybody who has worked on this diligently, and very proud to have this asset and resource to be able to present to Indian country.
Thank you, Carly. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give time to introduce one of the Native Farm Bill Coalition's co-chairs, Carrie Jo Lawrence. She is the executive director of the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So I wanted to toss it over to Carrie Jo and just say, miigwech, thank you for joining us, Carrie Jo, today. And I just wanted to give the floor to you for a couple of remarks.
Wonderful, thank you. Hello, my name is Carrie Jo Lawrence, and I serve as the executive director of the Intertribal Agriculture Council and also the co-chair of the Native Farm Bill Coalition. I'm so proud of the work that we have completed thus far in compiling the issues for the tribal producers and the tribal leaders that they have brought to our attention. And it's been so important to the work, and without their without them informing this important work, you know, we just couldn't do it without you. So this is going to serve as the go-to resource for some of the most pressing Farm Bill related issues in Indian country, and including Alaska. So we're so proud, and we're so excited to get to work on all of these issues, and to see what some of the, I'm sorry. So this report is really the first step in securing more of the tribal provisions in the next Farm Bill reauthorization. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, and I look forward to the work ahead. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie Jo. Next slide, please. So as we've kind of touched on throughout this presentation, we wouldn't be able to do this great work without the amazing support of so many across Indian country in the United States, and including organizations like the Native American Ag Fund. So I just wanted to give some time. Tony is not able to join us today, the CEO, Tony Stanger, but we do have a pre-recorded video from her. So I wanted to give some opportunity just for her to reflect on the report and the support that NAF has given the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So.
Hello, my name is Tony Stanger, and I am the CEO of the Native American Agriculture Fund. The Native American Agriculture Fund, or NAF, is excited to be a sponsor of the second report, and this report regarding the Farm Bill is Gaining Ground. The Gaining Ground report is monumental and important to Indian country because the first report was the most comprehensive assessment ever written of Farm Bill risks and opportunities for tribes, Native American producers, and urban Native American communities. This second report follows up on the incredible success of the Native Farm Bill Coalition and their partners in their combined efforts to provide information to Indian country on becoming their own advocates and including their information that is important to their communities, their cultural community issues, as well as overall food insecurity, infrastructure, health, you name it. It's in the Farm Bill, and it's important to Indian country. And for this combined effort to come to fruition, and for the first time, allow Indian country to have a unified voice is amazing. And we're just incredibly thankful for all of those that contributed to this, but also to be and play a small role in what has become one of the most successful advocacy efforts regarding the Farm Bill in history. There is ample information within the report itself. It gives a background on what the Farm Bill is, why certain parts of the Farm Bill are important, why certain parts of the Farm Bill need to be changed. And to have that in one central location, it will allow you to be able to make informed advocacy and educational recommendations to those who are decision makers. It allows you to have conversations with your local representatives, but also your representatives that are in Washington, D.C., and lay the groundwork for what Indian country needs collectively as a whole, but also if there are particular issues that are important to your community or the region that you exist in, for instance, certain types of disasters, whether it's related to drought or fires, those types of hot and button issues are focused issues. It lays out the framework on how you can advocate or educate your representatives on your particular issues. NAF looks forward to using this report so that we can formulate our requests for funds. We annually make grants, and in order to make those grants and stretch those dollars as far as we can, we rely on federal funding, and much of that funding from the Department of Agriculture comes through the Farm Bill. And we need everyone to voice their concern and their requests in the Farm Bill so that we have more funding and opportunities and technical services provided to Indian country as a whole.
Thank you for those words from Tony. Now I wanted to take time to just welcome Mazon, Mia Hubbard. She is Vice President of Programs, and they've also been a great supporter of the Native Farm Bill Coalition and this report. So Mia, I just wanted to turn over for you.
Thank you, and congratulations to all our colleagues on this call. As a national anti-hunger advocacy organization, Mazon is incredibly proud to align with tribal leaders, intertribal organizations, and other Native advocates of the Native Farm Bill Coalition in celebrating the vision that's been put forth in this report and in preparing for the hard work ahead to realize that vision. There's so much power in self-determined food systems, and this agenda-setting report really showcases the reality that Indian country has the solutions and they're already happening. And the federal government has an opportunity and an obligation to play a key role by listening, respecting, supporting, and leveraging those efforts. And this report gives a roadmap for how to do that. Mazon is excited to continue our longstanding support of the coalition and many Native partner organizations in the space, and to use our advocacy voice alongside our partners to lift up Indian country calls for food security. We joined the coalition back in 2017 as the first non-Native ally organization, and Mazon stands ready again to roll up our sleeves and to get to work advocating for Gaining Ground's food, agriculture, and nutrition priorities in the next Farm Bill. So thank you for the privilege to partner with you all.
Miigwech, Mia. Next slide, please. All right, now to get into what the Native Farm Bill Coalition is and the report. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin Parker and Carly, and they're going to take over the presentation now.
Great, thank you so much, Maribel. And thanks to Carrie Jo and to Tony and to Mia for all those kind words. We are so appreciative of everything that you said. And I think Tony actually did a really great job of setting up this section, which is a little bit about the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So I'm going to start off talking about what the NFBC is, and then we'll get into some of the priorities that are in the report. So in case you didn't know, the NFBC officially formed in 2017, and that's thanks to an initial investment from the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community through their Seeds of Native Health initiative. The founding organizations of the Native Farm Bill Coalition were, of course, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the National Congress of American Indians, Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, and our organization, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, as the coalition's research partner. The coalition really represented the first time the Indian country came together, as Tony said, to speak with one voice about inclusion in this incredibly significant piece of legislation. The Farm Bill is huge. It supports everything you can think of in food systems, pretty much everything from conservation to agricultural credit to support for Native farmers and ranchers who are trying to market traditional food products and food assistance programs. All of that is in this incredibly significant legislation. But if you look back over the history of farm bills, Indian country has historically been left out of this significant federal policy for agriculture. If you look back to the first farm bills in the 1930s, for example, there's barely any mention of Indian country, and none of those provisions were anything that anybody today would call native-led. But by the time the 2018 Farm Bill was signed, by contrast, we saw over 63 tribal-specific provisions, and so much of that came from Indian country speaking with one voice through the Native Farm Bill Coalition. Back in 2018, by the time the Farm Bill was signed, there were over 100 tribal nations who were members of the NFBC and over 15 intertribal organizations and ally organizations as well. Those 63 tribal specific provisions were really a watershed moment for Indian country food and agriculture. And today I'm really excited to say that the Native Farm Bill Coalition currently has over 200 member tribal nations. So our membership has doubled since the 2018 Farm Bill was signed, and we're really excited to go into the 2023 Farm Bill season with even more tribal nations on board. If we want to go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the work that came before. Tony mentioned this as well in her remarks. In 2017, as part of the founding of the Native Farm Bill Coalition, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and our role as the research partner to the coalition, authored a report called Regaining Our Future. And that provided an analysis of 2018 Farm Bill opportunities across all 12 Farm Bill titles, just like the report we're releasing today. The report we're releasing today, Gaining Ground, is a sister and a sequel to that report. But one of the exciting things we got to do because of all of the work of the coalition and member tribes and member intertribal organizations and allies is that we got to look backwards a little bit and see the ground that was gained for Indian country in 2018 with those 63 tribal specific provisions. So we named the report Gaining Ground in a nod to that. And we also wanted to look ahead to future opportunities as well, because that's what this report is all about, the ground that can be gained in the future for Indian country by better inclusion in federal agricultural policy. We also wanted to acknowledge the extraordinary importance with this name of tribal control over tribal lands. That's something that we support every day at IFAI. When I go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what's in the report and start getting into actual priorities. So there are over 150 opportunities contained within this report in the next Farm Bill for Indian country that, if they were passed, would improve food security for tribal citizens. It would enhance tribal sovereignty over tribal food systems. It would strengthen economic development in tribal communities across Indian country, and it would support more Indigenous-led natural resource stewardship and rural development opportunities as well. It's a long report with a lot of detail. We're not going to go through every single priority today, but we've done our best to distill it down into 5 categories that we're going to go over with you today. We'll start with food security. So if we want to go to the next slide, we will get into that one. There we go. Thank you, Whitney. All right, so let's talk about food security. You can't talk about food security in the Farm Bill without starting first and foremost with the nutrition title. That's Title 4 of the Farm Bill. And several of the biggest opportunities to really support food security for Indian country in the Farm Bill do take place here in Title 4. When we talk about food security and the Farm Bill, we're also thinking about tribal sovereignty as well. So you'll notice that some of these pillars that we've kind of distilled down for you sort of overlap, just the way a lot of food systems work overlaps too. When we think about tribal sovereignty and food security in the Farm Bill, we think about 638 first. 638 is in the area of tribal self-governance and self-determination. It has been around since the 1970s and enables tribal nations to take over programs, services, activities, functions of federal programs using federal dollars. So it's a strong acknowledgement of tribal sovereignty and also the trust responsibility that the federal government owes to tribal nations. However, despite being around since 1970s, it had never applied to USDA until 2018. In the 2018 Farm Bill, for the very first time, applied this authority to USDA in 2 key places. One of them is in the nutrition title, with a self-determination contracting opportunity for food sourcing in the FDIPR program, or the food distribution program on Indian reservations. That program actually finally got started recently. That 638 program, it's up and running now. There are currently 8 tribes that are participating in the 638 pilot project that was passed in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's offering tribes a chance to fulfill the role that tribes have fulfilled for their citizens from time immemorial, making sure that they have access to good, healthy food. This offers tribes the ability to source food directly using federal dollars for FDIPR, instead of having the federal government making decisions about what tribal citizens should be eating. So it's a really significant opportunity for tribally produced food to finally make its way into one of these critical food assistance programs that supports tribal citizens. So that's an opportunity that you'll see in the report, is the expansion and the making permanent of that particular opportunity so that it keeps going from this Farm Bill and beyond. There's also a recommendation to include expansion of self-determination and self-governance authorities really to all Farm Bill nutrition assistance programs, and that includes SNAP too, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The report really highlights the need for 638 opportunities for SNAP as well as FDIPR, and really for tribal administration of SNAP just flat out. Tribes are not currently eligible to administer this program, which is really unfortunate because there are over 25% of all American Indian and Alaska Native people today who rely on SNAP monthly. And that was even before the pandemic had a disastrous effect on food security in Indian country. Despite all of that, tribes are not currently eligible to run the SNAP program. So closing that gap would really help many Native people have direct access to this program without having to go through the states. Similarly, the report is also going to highlight the need for tribal administration of TFAP, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program. This is another food assistance program that tribes are unfortunately not currently eligible to operate. It's a critical program in times of emergencies, whether that's a global health crisis or a natural disaster, or both at the same time, which frequently impact tribal citizens disproportionately. So having tribal administration access to run a program that's so important in emergencies is definitely an opportunity that's lifted up in the report. So is the inclusion of more traditional and tribally produced foods in all USDA food assistance programs. There's a significant opportunity there to change policy in the upcoming Farm Bill to increase food access to those foods in Indian country. And the report has multiple ways that there are legal authorities that could change, that would facilitate more traditional, culturally appropriate, or tribally produced foods getting into the hands of tribal citizens. That includes everything from tribal exemptions to some burdensome statutory and regulatory procurement requirements that too often keep tribally produced food out of USDA programs right now. It also includes expanded cooperative agreement or self-governance authorities. All of those changes would help traditional, culturally appropriate foods from tribal producers enter USDA markets and support tribal citizens' food security at the same time. And really broadly, before we go on to the next category, I just want to say that I think food security really goes beyond just the food assistance program. So even though we've focused right now today on the Title IV, the nutrition and food assistance programs, whether we're talking about food security or nutrition security, the way to get to that security piece of those phrases is really to establish long-term, stable food systems in partnership with tribal producers who can fully access the kind of programs and financial supports that will help them thrive in their businesses and feed their communities at the same time. So in that context, really everything, all 150 plus of recommendations that you'll find in Gaining Ground in some way are tied back to an increase in food security for tribal citizens. And one of the ways that you do that, obviously, is to increase federal policy's full-throated support for tribal sovereignty. So if we want to go to the next slide, we can talk about that too. So we'll see 638 here as well in the Farm Bill's opportunity to enhance tribal sovereignty over tribal food systems. 638 is definitely the first place that we'll start. 638, as I mentioned previously, is included in the 2018 Farm Bill in 2 places, one in the nutrition title, but one also in the forestry title, Title 8, which has a self-determination contracting opportunity through the Tribal Forest Protection Act. However, I think it's important to note that because this was such a new authority to USDA, Congress in 2018 decided to make both of those projects demonstration projects. That means they're not permanent. So unless Congress acts to make them permanent or expand them in the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill, they have the potential to go away. So the report, of course, discusses making both of those programs permanent as a way to enhance tribal sovereignty over food systems and agricultural policy. But it also discusses things even beyond that. It doesn't stop at just those two existing programs. The report discusses expanding 638 to all USDA authorities. And this is something that I think it's important to note that USDA is actually already committed to. In November of 2021, Secretary Vilsack issued a statement committing the entire department to expanding self-governance and self-determination, and USDA's action plan, also equity action plan, also repeats that statement and recommits the department to that. But there really needs to be some statutory change in a farm bill to give life to those commitments from USDA. USDA will also need some staff to be able to run 638 contracts. There aren't really contract specialists at USDA like you would see at BIA. A lot of the current opportunities are being sort of done in conjunction with BIA as a result. So USDA needs to build a house for its 638 work, and you'll find highlighted in the report recommendations for that as well. But 638 expansion is definitely not the only opportunity for enhancing tribal sovereignty that you'll see in the report. There's also mentions of expanding alternative funding arrangements through NRCS programming. There's also expanded cooperative agreement authority discussions within the report as well, particularly for the Agricultural Marketing Service and for FNS at USDA. We don't normally think of a cooperative agreement with a governmental entity as a self-governance tool exactly, but I think we've seen recently that they can be pretty flexible in terms of getting tribally produced foods into tribal communities through USDA programs in a way that kind of circumvents a lot of the problematic procurement requirements that I mentioned before. We can see that with the Local Food Cooperative Assistance Program. I think if that program were fully funded, had a lot more funding behind it, they would be a really incredible, powerful tool to be able to make sure that tribal producers have an economic development opportunity to sell their products to USDA for tribal citizens and to enhance food security at the same time. And the last thing that we talk about when we talk about tribal sovereignty is also the concept of expanding parity in USDA programs. When we talk about that, most often we simply mean every single place in the Farm Bill where there's an opportunity for the federal government to let a state or local government run a program that and tribes needs to be included within that, so that it's very clear that tribal governments also have the power to access those funds and make sure that their citizens in turn also can access those funds. So you'll find those opportunities across the report because they exist across the Farm Bill as well in all 12 titles. And all of that work is really designed not only to enhance food security and tribal sovereignty, but you'll also heard me talk a lot about economic development at the same time, because as I mentioned, all three of these things really go together. So with that, I think we're going to go to the next slide. And I am going to turn it over to our Associate Director, Carrie Griffith Hotbed. Carrie.
Thanks, Erin. So the Farm Bill is a large omnibus title with multiple programs and multiple sub-agencies involved and a lot of money. Over $400 billion comes through each authorized Farm Bill. But it also represents the largest funding transfer to Indian country. Not DOI, not BIA, not IHS, USDA Farm Bill. Over $4 billion flows to Indian country through these authorized Farm Bill titles. And so economic development is a huge and critical opportunity that comes through multiple titles within the Farm Bill, but especially through the credit title. And access to credit has been a huge issue in Indian country for quite some time. And we know that I would say culminated, but that's not the apex of the challenges that have been experienced in Indian country with regard to access to credit. But the Keep Siegel lawsuit and subsequent settlement really reflects some of the challenges that producers in Indian country have experienced with regard to accessing credit through USDA programs, either through direct loans, guaranteed loans, or other support for credit. We hold land in Indian country very differently than many other producers within the United States. And unfortunately, a lot of our credit programs through USDA have not necessarily been set up or processed from a regulatory perspective to be inclusive of Indian country priorities or the way we hold land. That trust land status or restricted or allotted land status can be very unfamiliar to guaranteed lenders who are participating in the guaranteed loan program, or even USDA loan officers through the direct loan program. We've seen progress made and a commitment by USDA to address those challenges, but we also know that how we collateralize those loans can be a challenge. because of the allotted and trust land perspective. And there are processes in place that will allow that. But one of the biggest encouragements and feedbacks that we heard from our stakeholders was, how can we provide alternative collateral opportunities and that would prevent risking the land base within Indian country in order to be able to access this credit. We also heard a lot about more flexibility in terms, whether that is through graduation requirements, whether that's through extended length of loan terms from 30 years to 40 years, which would allow a lot more flexibility in the income requirements in order to support a creditworthiness evaluation for producers to be able to receive those loans. And then also a reevaluation of USDA existing as a lender of last resort. Many times our producers in Indian country, we tend to live a little more rural, a little more remote, and getting access to either those USDA offices or the private financial lenders can be a challenge. And there are also time delays to consider when it comes to the underwriting process. Currently, a producer that's seeking credit has to be denied from a private lender or receive unfavorable terms from an approved private lender's loan offer before they can go to USDA to receive the type of credit support that they need. There's the feedback that we've been getting from our stakeholders, and which is incorporated in this report, reveals a need for additional flexibility and special consideration for our producers in Indian country to have parity or an equal seat at the table and a fair bite at the apple in order to grow and increase or even start their operations. In addition to support for access to credit, the report contains information about a CDFI pilot. CDFI is a community development financial institution, which kind of operates as an in-between from a private lender and USDA, really identifying producers that may be viewed as a credit risk, but this pilot program would authorize relending and make that access to capital much easier for Indian country, and also allow tribes a seat at the table, that especially those that operate their own CDFIs, to participate in a relending opportunity. Access to credit is a huge issue and is really necessary, and we will also have supplemental materials coming out with regard to those needs as we release this report and continue to engage our stakeholders on these issues and efforts. In addition to access to credit, there's great opportunities, and we've seen some progress in this field to include trade representatives from Indian country within trade delegations that USDA sponsors. We know that international markets can be a great fit for our Indian country producers that have products ready to go, ready to sell. And we know that there's a significant demand for those types of products, especially as people are becoming more interested in learning where their food comes from and having a better perspective on supporting local producers and regional producers, even through that global perspective. In addition to the inclusion of trade representatives in that trade delegation, this report is also emphasizing the opportunities that will come through USDA's incorporation of the Buy Indian Act. Getting native foods into federal programs and to be on native plates and non-native plates across the United States is a critical component towards that economic development. That federal funding transfer that authorizes procurement to source from indigenous producers and other tribal agribusiness entities can be really supportive to recirculate that funding and identify opportunities and maximize opportunities for tribal producers to be able to really build up their operations and not only become self-sustaining, but profitable by being able to leverage these federal programs. That Buy Indian Act is also reflective of that federal trust obligation, as we were removed from our homelands or relegated to reservations. Our tribes and tribal members became separated from traditional food sources, and we were required to convert and to adapt. And part of that adaptation includes the support from USDA to help us find those markets or help purchase or procure those foods that we produce in order to become self-sustaining, and not just self-sustaining, but successful and profitable as well as we work towards that. And that economic development component is really critical to supporting those efforts. We also know that alternative models of service delivery can really facilitate better access to USDA programmatic support in Indian country. What is an alternative model of service delivery? You heard Erin talk about self-governance and self-administration opportunities where tribes have the ability to run federally funded programs under their own tribal or programmatic umbrella. But that's just one example of what an alternative model of service delivery can look like. That can look like housing a USDA office on a tribal campus or headquarters, entering into an MOU or MOA partnership in order for employees to be funded through different funding mechanisms, but still wear the clothing or coat of a federal employee tasked with specifically serving Indian country. There's also opportunities with regard to waivers. Every single program at USDA is eligible for a tribe to seek a waiver for, whether there may be issues with the program as it currently stands being the best fit, or there may be some nuances or challenges that a tribe may have in accessing that program. Every single tribe can request a waiver, and we know that that flexibility is going to be very critical towards supporting and improving economic development opportunities and facilitating that federal funding transfer to be really impactful in Indian country in a similar way that it's been for other parts of the United States. In addition to waivers and the self-governance and self-administration opportunities, there's also great potential for direct support through the federally recognized Tribal Extension Program. That program saw some great changes in the 2018 Farm Bill, but we know that there's additional support needed where additional entities were authorized to become eligible and participate in that federally recognized Tribal Extension Program. The demand increased significantly, and we know there's a need for additional support there. Those tribal extension officers that are authorized under that FERTEP program do a great job in supporting our individual Indian country producers across a variety of topics. And so, access, in addition to all the previously mentioned topics, economic development is a huge component of this Gaining Ground report. And really, when you look at any program through the lens of economic development, there are distinct and particular impacts that we know are very viable and feasible within Indian country. And we recognize that in addition to securing a safe, sustainable, and healthy food system within Indian country, that USDA Farm Bill also has the opportunity to track with economic development opportunities side by side in existence with every single program throughout. So we talked a little bit about alternative models of service delivery, and I want to focus on a specific one in the natural resources portion of this Gaining Ground report. So if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So we know that in Indian country, we're the original stewards of this land. It's really critical and really important to recognize that our indigenous knowledge has really facilitated continued opportunity to have a sustainable land management and natural resource base, and especially as we're looking towards addressing challenges of climate change. So in that context, when we're talking about alternative models of service delivery, there's a really great opportunity within the natural resources title of the Farm Bill to address alternative funding arrangements. You heard me talk about waivers just a little bit ago, but alternative funding arrangements are specific to programs within the Natural Resources Conservation Service that tribes are able to access for programs or projects. And it's really exciting to see what that opportunity looks like, because it makes those programs fit for tribes. And that's a negotiable process that tribes enter into with USDA and have the opportunity to really tackle some of the larger scale projects or programmatic offerings within their reservations or communities that may not necessarily be a one-to-one fit for existing NRCS programs. There's also a method for AFAs to be reflective of tribal ecological knowledge. Tribal ecological knowledge is really critical, especially as we're thinking about it through the lens of climate change impacts and the weather volatility that we're experiencing. And a lot of those tribal ecological knowledge concepts aren't necessarily included in the list of project activities that are eligible for conservation reimbursement. So being reflective of our traditional values and our traditional knowledge, especially in a way that they are financially and economically viable is a really critical resource that we know can be very, very impactful for the work that's done with regard to conserving and preserving our natural resources and stewarding those in a way that they're going to be available not just for this generation and the next generation, but 7 generations to come, consistent with our perspective about what it means to be responsible and interrelated with our community and environmental surroundings. Indian country has had a huge need for conservation practices, and that challenge has been, continued for quite some time because of the barriers and red tape associated with land management in Indian country based on the way that we hold land and trust and restricted status. But in the early 90s, a report was commissioned reviewing the total need for ag lands or idle lands in Indian country that had the potential for ag development. And it was recognized that, due to a lot of these bureaucratic challenges with red tape and with highly fractionated land systems, large acreages did not have the ability to get enrolled in certain conservation programs that would not only improve the quality and nature of the land and natural resources contained therein, but also eliminate value loss based on encroachment, based on trespass, based on a reduction in the value of land because of invasive species and poor natural resource management, simply because of the challenges in being able to enroll that land into those federal programs. So we know that there's an additional need for flexibility, and there's been some authorizations that come through, and we've seen some continued progress to really address that. And we're hopeful that through the Gaining Ground recommendations that we'll see additional progress in that field. Conservation is really key to building those sustainable food systems for generations to come. And we know that Indigenous producers and land managers can be a key component in order to make that happen and build up those food systems so that we can be truly sovereign. We can't be truly sovereign unless we can feed our own people, and taking a cognizant approach and really getting in the driver's seat to making sure that we as tribal people and leadership in tribal governments know that we shouldn't just be blown by the wind when it comes to being impacted by federal policies or external stressors or other types of food movements, but really taking a cognizant approach about how we can be interventionary and guide and steer our path forward and make sure that we have the ability to feed our own people in a sustainable and successful manner. And part of that also includes reviewing what kind of legs up we can get. Indigenous producers are qualified under the socially disadvantaged designation, which is available for a variety of groups, including minority producers, women, beginning farmers and ranchers, and veterans. But those socially disadvantaged components can do things like provide upfront cost shares or increase the percentage of guaranteed funds allocated for loans, like through credit titles, and give additional flexibilities that maybe weren't previously available to us in order to help us get on parity level, get on level ground, instead of being in competition with everybody else who's signing up for these programs. So that can look like a funding set aside. It can look like additional support and technical assistance. There's really a lot of flexibility there, and this report reflects the need for that to continue, and also includes additional considerations to really help out those socially disadvantaged populations that Indigenous producers fall into. Next slide. So in addition to economic development and natural resource stewardship, rural development is a great component of that. Like I said a little bit earlier, Indian country tends to be a little more rural, tends to be more remote. And in many areas around the country, our tribal governments are the strongest remaining rural government entity. In some locations, tribal governments have even taken over the management of key infrastructure, such as water systems, electricity, and other utilities, including broadband, because there's not another governmental body or non-governmental entity that is able to facilitate or handle those functions, certainly not in the way that a lot of tribal governments are able to. Being a Cherokee citizen from Oklahoma, it's very readily apparent how impactful our tribes, not only here in Oklahoma, but across the nation are in securing services and, access to infrastructure opportunities within our rural areas, water projects, road projects, utilities and infrastructure. Those are really critical towards allowing people to continue to remain or to continue to have the ability to live in a rural area, stay on the reservation if you choose, but being able to, access the job opportunities and economic opportunities that come along with that. And we know we can't be really competitive unless we're able to, further secure broadband opportunities. Access to internet for our tribal producers and ag producers is really critical because the internet and connectivity opportunities allow for expanded market access. And without that, we remain behind the curve when it comes to e-commerce. And that e-commerce can be a really, really important component of supporting our economic development in Indian country. So as we're talking about tribes stepping in and filling these gaps that other governments or non-governmental entities, are not able to cover, we know that parity or that capability needs to come along with parity. We need to add tribes and tribal producers alongside state or local governments anywhere that's listed in the Farm Bill to ensure tribes have access to those programs and access to the funding necessary to operate those programs in order to serve not only Indian country, but also anybody else living within Indian country who may not be, a member or citizen of a tribe. All boats rise when it comes to tribal investment in rural development, infrastructure, and economy. And we know that, job creation is a critical component of that. In order to avoid, flight to municipalities and larger city areas, it's really important to create those opportunities for people to be successful in their hometowns and their home areas, especially on those reservations. Tribal parity is really critical. We know that 12% of tribal homes lack access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation, which is more than 20 times the national average. And we also know that 35% of Americans living on tribal lands lack access to those broadband services compared to 8% of all Americans. We have a lot of ground to gain when it comes to accessing and being supportive of that rural infrastructure. And we also know that infrastructure investment that was, pretty heavily funded in the 1950s and 60s and even 70s in the United States didn't necessarily hit Indian country in the same way. But even if it was, or the infrastructure systems that are in place have a lot of deferred maintenance that come along with that and need a lot of refurbishment or replacement. And so we're hopeful to see the Farm Bill titles be inclusive and considerate of tribes when it comes to making those investments in Indian country. We also would be looking for some streamlined processes to access rural development financing in Indian country. We've heard from our stakeholders that there have been challenges in being able to access those programs in a timely fashion. And lastly, we'd also encourage, this is a carryover priority from the Regaining Our Future report, would be to consider all of Indian country under the SUDA designation, which is a substantially underserved trust area. And we know that substantially underserved trust designation, or SUDA, allows better access to programs and funding to really address the gaps that exist within Indian country. And so that's a highlight and an overview of 5 pillars within this report. And there's so much more to it. You heard well over 150 priorities, and we'll continue to issue updated and inclusive priorities as we continue to engage our stakeholders and get feedback from Indian country. But we're really excited to do this work. We appreciate very much having the trust not only of our Native Farm Bill Coalition membership and stakeholder groups, but also with our partners, both public and private. And we're thrilled to roll this out for you. And with that, I'll kick it back to Mary Bell.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin and Carly. So I did want to take some time for a question and answer, and just to remind folks that you can ask questions if you're streaming live on our social by commenting, or you can ask questions here on Zoom in the Q&A or comments. But to get started on that, which I think we might be able to go to the next slide too, if I remember correctly. Yes, so that includes the link to Gaining Ground. But in the meantime, first I'm going to start out with one of Shannon Brown's questions. And Shannon is curious about hemp foods included in any provision of the sections for Native producers. as part of food system development or hub development?
So I can take that one, Mary Bell. When we're talking about food systems development or hub development, hemp was a recently authorized crop for production under the 2018 Farm Bill. And when we're looking at provisions for specialty crops, or when we're looking at opportunities for research and development, hemp would be eligible for those in a similar manner that other specialty crops would be under existing Farm Bill titles. This Gaining Ground report is really reflective of the feedback and requests that our stakeholders have elevated. And to my knowledge to date, questions about incorporating hemp specifically for development have not necessarily been some of the top priorities that we've heard about. But we, will continue to do research and, check out opportunities at the request of how our stakeholder groups and our Native Farm Bill Coalition members are interested in seeing that move forward.
I would say too, even though hemp foods aren't included specifically in these provisions, that you will find in Gaining Ground a host of requests or opportunities and tribal set-asides in programs like local food promotion program that you could use to promote hemp products. The problem with calling out hemp food products specifically in the Farm Bill, unfortunately, is at the moment, as you probably already know, the Food and Drug Administration is the federal agency that actually does the regulation of whether or not those food products are generally recognized as safe ingredients. So it would have to be a different piece of federal legislation that would specifically target any opening up of that. There are some right now, but I would just say in terms of hemp products, like definitely check out the local food promotion program and some of the other things in Title 10, because I think those are going to be things that would probably be most relevant to marketing those products.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question, Shannon. I also wanted to ask from James, who is in charge of SNAP and food access programs. So Erin, I think this is a good one for you to take.
Sure, I can jump in here. So SNAP is administered at the federal level by the USDA, specifically the Food Nutrition Service. But really today, SNAP is most frequently actually administered on the ground only by states. It's through state agencies, and that's the way that the legislation that created SNAP is set up. There's no pathway directly in the congressional legislation for tribes to be able to run SNAP right now. There is a really complicated regulatory pathway that about 3 tribes have been able to navigate, but it isn't a full SNAP administration. It's sort of a partnership with a state. So what you'll find in Gaining Ground is a recommendation for full and robust tribal administration of SNAP, just like a state would be able to do for SNAP to be able to be offered by a tribe for tribal citizens. There's also a recommendation in here for 638. For like food assistance programs generally, it really varies by the program. You'll find some like FDIPR that are able to be operated or administered by an ITO, an Indian tribal organization, but there are still a lot of them that are only administered by states or entities that are organized under state law, and that's how TFAP is right now. But it's a really good question.
All right, then I'm going to move on to Jeremy's question. Is there anything that pertains to Native cattle producers, cow-calf operations?
Yeah,
Carly,
I'll take that one. Great question, Jeremy. We've gotten a lot of feedback from Native Farm Bill Coalition members and stakeholders that do engage in cattle production, especially cow-calf. And when we're talking about that, that looks like disaster programs under FSA. It also looks like access to credit opportunities. It can look like access to different type of crop insurance, or insurance or risk management provisions specific to livestock. And the feedback that we've received through our stakeholder groups can be found throughout that Gaining Ground report in those areas. So under the credit title and Title 5, under the commodities title, when it comes to those disaster assistance provisions, and there's additional considerations through conservation programs as well when it comes to managing that the pastures that your cow-calf are going to be on, and being able to have better access and upfront funding to engage in conservation management activities like cross fencing, like fencing for riparian zones, and other types of conservation practices and activities. So yes, there are a lot of provisions in here that are specific to cow-calf operations, or that could apply to cow-calf operations. And I would definitely encourage you to check out the report, but also, feel free to reach out to us if there's something that, we can point you in the right direction for, either, through the Native Farm Bill Coalition, through IFAI or our partners at Intertribal Ad Council, or even, maybe some other technical assistance opportunities through IAC, or maybe even NAF, or some federal partners that we have at USDA that also provide technical assistance. We're happy to do that. But yeah, there's some good stuff in there that's going to be applicable for native producer cow-calf operations.
All right, before I move on to the next question, I thought we could go to the next slide, because Carly mentioned different ways to stay in touch and get in touch with us. And I believe I have some, yes. So that are just some different ways for the Native Farm Bill Coalition that you can get in touch. And I'll also include, for those who are tuning in on Zoom, some links to some different websites for the IFAI, Intertribal Ad Council, a few other folks that Carly mentioned. But now I'm wanting to ask another question from Shannon. What about research and development or funding for tribes and tribal organizations to develop marketing products and funding to scale manufacturing from concept to full-scale production?
There are a lot of opportunities that exist in Farm Bill to support this work. I always want to point out the research, education, and extension title. There's provisions in there that can support programmatic efforts to create programs or partnership opportunities to assist producers in engaging in taking that product from, production. I also want to point out the value added producer grant that's under the local ag marketing program. That's in AMS, that's the ag marketing service. Please check that out. There's a new report that just came out from USDA. It's a brochure or booklet that lists out the programs that USDA offers to Indian country and native producers. And I don't know if anybody has the ability to drop that link into the chat, but that's a fantastic resource. It's a USDA guide to programs that serve Indian country and Native American producers. And so that's a great way to access that. And then when we're talking about, from scale for manufacturing and taking a product from concept to full scale production, our partner organizations also have great resources to support that work as well, including the Intertribal Ad Council's American Indian Foods program. So definitely want to give them a shout out. But there are opportunities, grants.org will also be reflective of that. And if there are opportunities to increase parity or access for, more competitive grants and ways that tribes can be inclusive, we definitely want to hear your experience with that and hear, what's been successful, what's been a challenge, and if there's a way that, we can incorporate some of those policy priorities as we move forward.
All right, well, I think that covers all the questions that have come in so far, and we're reaching the top of the hour here shortly. So I just wanted to take a moment and also give a big thanks to NAF and IAC's communications folks that have helped make this run so smoothly. So thanks you guys so much for all of your help to make this launch happen. We did get one question in. Okay, so who is offering grants for aquaponics farming or vertical farming that is fully self-sustainable and able to support many families with produce and protein?
So I can try and tackle that. There's a few different options. It really depends on, what kind of scale you're looking at, or, if this is intended to be an individual opportunity. There may be some, if there's a water conservation project that's at issue there, I would definitely check out some of the programs offered through Natural Resources Conservation Service. There may be some, I know the question was specific to grants, but in that instance, if it's an individual operation or an operation intended for, sustainable production or revenue generation, that may be a loan funding opportunity. But I also know that if, that's something that a tribe or a tribal enterprise or organization, or tribally run organization is interested in administering, there may be some, opportunities under the regional foods program that is housed under that local ag marketing program. And, we're happy to consult and provide additional options as far as that's concerned. I'm going to go ahead and tackle this next one that came into the Q&A as well, while we have time real quick, and probably make that one the last one since we are, over the time. But what funding resources are there for purchasing large farm equipment that costs over $150,000 other than USDA loans? So again, check out your CDFIs, check out your private lenders. The Farm Credit Administration is a great resource to access and learn more about what funding options are available in your area. We recognize that access to access to equipment, especially equipment that is set up, that stuff can be expensive if you're an individual producer. And we also really want to encourage tribal governments to take a look at the way they may be able to acquire equipment and make that available for local producers to use. And there are funding mechanisms through USDA that could be available there as well. So definitely check those out. Follow-up questions, please get a hold of us. We're happy to help you, put you in the right direction further.
All right. Well, thanks everyone so much for attending today. And we hope you can check out Gaining Ground on the Native Farm Bill Coalition's website, nativefarmbill.com/gaining-ground. And again, thank you, Miigwech, for tuning in. And we hope to see you guys around. So take care.